Welcome, everybody. My name is Molly McGinty. I'm the program director at IPPNW's central office in Boston, Massachusetts. And today we're here with IPPNW's Climate Working Group, following COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, where Dr. Dennis Apondo, Laura Vunder, and Yusuf Dominic represented IPPNW. So as we all know, militarism, war, and the rising dangers of nuclear escalation are impacting the climate emergency. These intertwining threats to life create vicious cycles of violence and climate breakdown for frontline communities through immense carbon emissions of militaries, massive investments in military spending that could be diverted to climate finance, and nuclear legacies of both nuclear weapons and nuclear energy infrastructure that reduce capacities for climate mitigation and adaptation. We all know that this urgently needs to change. At the beginning of 2025, we here today are seeing a world that seems more volatile and less capable of dealing with the crises at hand, but there's hope. Last year, IPPNW sent delegations to, among a number of UN summits, the UN Summit for the Future and COP29. Through these experiences and more, we see the interconnected nature of crises is increasingly recognized at the world stage. Conflict, transformation, peace, and disarmament are emerging at the sidelines of climate talks. So in the year ahead, IPPNW will continue to work with partners and government leaders to strengthen this positive development and spread the hopeful message that a peaceful, climate just, and nuclear-free world is possible. So today, again, we're here to learn from three of our foremost experts in IPPNW. Dr. Dennis Apondo is a health manager at Kalobe. Dennis, please correct me if I'm wrong there, refugee operations and global health specialist in Kenya. He brings his experiences in supporting displaced persons and communities on the front lines of violent conflicts and climate breakdown into his climate and peace advocacy. Is the Climate Justice and Global Health Officer at IPPNW Germany. She is intrigued and inspired by the many co-benefits to human and planetary health that may be achieved by demilitarization and peace work. And Yusuf Dominic is a medical officer at Maiduguri, Nigeria. He is a humanitarian and climate activist working towards nuclear abolition and environmental justice with IPPNW Nigeria and beyond. So we're going to hear from all three of our experts today. I'm going to ask them questions for about the next 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So please keep any questions either to yourself or put them in the chat, and I will keep track of them. So we're going to start here with a question for all three of you. Why is this topic important to you? What has IPPNW done and what has IPPNW done? And please share some of the challenges faced previously. So Dennis, we'll start with you. Why is this topic important to you?
So thank you, Molly, for that question, and happy to see all of us here today. So I'll just start with probably what IPPNW has achieved in the past maybe 2 years or so. So I think I've found IPPNW's work to be quite transformative and impactful for the past 2 years. And I think this has been my most active 2 years. And this is from the number of conferences or the number of meetings that we've had, and we've had IPPNW Africa delegation represented. And this is to start with the African Conference on Universalization of TPNW that happened at some point in 2024, where we were represented by Kelvin Kibet and other representatives from ICANN. It highlighted the critical role in African nations, especially in global disarmament efforts, and especially at this time where climate crisis continues to disproportionately hit African countries. So similarly, we had another representation at the United Nations Civil Society Conference, which was held in Nairobi, and I attended that myself with Kevin Kibet and the African student representative, Bon Machuka. And this was an invaluable platform, especially because it amplified the African perspective on the twin existential threat of nuclear war. nuclear weapons rather, and climate change. And we also had a chance to make a statement through our friends of IPPNW, who is Carol Agengo. She's the regional representative for Africa for HelpAge, and she was also the co-chair of the 2024 UN Civil Society Conference. Additionally, we also have been represented at COP28 and COP29, which I was also lucky to join the delegation at Azerbaijan late last year. And this just shows a commitment that we've had in terms of advocating for the interconnectedness of the two twin existential threat. So with the COP delegation, I think we had an opportunity to advocate for urgent and integrated action. And I think the fact that we have been at the brink of a nuclear war, IPPNW has never been more relevant. So that's it from what I feel that we've had successes in. Some of the challenges that we've faced is, of course, even at COP29, we had challenges trying to pass our message, and we also faced, I think, a bit of, I would say, speaking out, and I think this has been mentioned before by in our previous conversations, where we had some interactions that were not very interesting, especially from lobbyists of fossil fuels and nuclear energy. And this is one of the challenges that we have facing, and I expect that we continue to face. So other than that, I think I'm happy that we are moving forward, because the discussions are getting to more ears, and our advocacy is getting to more people, and that's a plus. So I'm really looking forward to 2025. Over and back to you, Molly.
Great, thank you so much, Dennis. And I'm looking forward to exploring some more opportunities in 2025 as the conversation continues. Let's move on to you, Yusuf. Great to see your video here. Do you want to explain a little bit about why this topic is important to you, and maybe share a bit about achievements of IPPNW and some challenges we have going ahead?
Okay, thank you very much, Molly, for the question, and thank you, Dennis, for highlighting IPPNW's achievements so far, and even our participation as COP. I'm delighted to be here. And I'd like to talk about why the topic is important to me. It's because it sincerely does resonate deeply with me because of the challenges of climate change, together with peace building and disarmament. This is because they're intricately linked together. So coming from Nigeria, the country facing the dual challenges of climate change and displacement, and conflicts over scarce resources, I have witnessed firsthand those issues which compound to human suffering. I have firsthand had those experiences myself, which I shared some time back prior to COP29, where the city of Maiduguri was heavily flooded, and it caused quite a number of displacements, which was also greatly linked to internal migration. And at COP, I engaged with a lot of passionate advocates who worked to integrate the peace building and climate justice, which was a plus. And it became very evident that the militarization exacerbates inequalities, and it undermines global efforts to combat climate change. So for me, addressing disarmament is not just a moral imperative, but it is a necessary step towards a sustainable and peaceful environment with resilience. So talking about what IPPNW has done, over the years, IPPNW has done quite a lot, because I will say with boldness that it has actually been the organization that has been in the forefront that link health, disarmament, and also peace for decades. So some of the key efforts includes the advocacies that has been done for nuclear disarmament through the TPNW, that's the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And also it does highlight the humanitarian and environmental impacts of nuclear weapons, which is actually a very key item to note, and also mobilizing health and care professionals worldwide to amplify the nexus between militarization and public health and climate change, because just as the word implies, it's a nexus. All of them are interlinked, you know, and the challenges so far has, the truth is, I think one of the biggest challenge that has been faced so far is the resistance from the nuclear armed states. Those are the world power, and then those countries also have significant military power, and they often block the progress of disarmament treaties. None have signed or ratified the TPNW, which is truly a shame, you know, and fragment advocacy. So disarmament and climate change movements are often siloed, you know, making it harder for those countries to achieve a coordinated action. For all other countries, also not just the nuclear armed states, but for all countries of the world. So by addressing these changes, so IPPNW is actually paving the way for a global movement that recognizes the inseparable link between peace, between environmental sustainability, and human well-being. So it's a global call for action that we as individuals should think local, should think global by acting local. That's my take. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. Thank you for sharing your insights, both in the blog piece that I put in the chat throughout the COP experience in Baku last year and today. It's really a pleasure to continue to work with you on this front and for your continued work connecting your personal experience, the climate crisis around the world, disarmament, and peace. So thanks for being here. Laura, finally, we'll pass it on to you and why this topic is important to you. Goals, opportunities, and challenges ahead.
Thank you, Molly. And I do apologize if my voice is a bit weak today. I think for me, I've started doing this work about 4 years ago with IPPNW Germany, especially together with Angelika Clausen, who's also here today. And it seems to me that this topic has really gained a lot of momentum over the past few years. On the one hand side, we've really seen it being picked up more and more in academia and activism, also at COP to a certain extent, at least. And this, of course, I find very hopeful, and it's also just very encouraging to be part of that movement to point out these interlinkages that are really important. On the other hand, of course, we here in Germany and in Europe as a whole have seen a war starting. We've seen the nuclear threat escalating in a manner that was probably a bit unimaginable before. And of course, we see these extremely rising levels of militarization and military spending, while the whole topic of tackling the climate crisis and climate justice seems to be further and further away from people and politicians as well. So I feel, therefore, it's really relevant to bring these topics together and also get them out there, because a lot of people, of course, are worried And I think we do have really relevant answers and also ideas of how to provide for climate justice and security without the threats of nuclear war and war at all. Thank you, Molly.
Thanks, Laura. And we'll explore some more of those topics now. And thank you for joining us while you are sick today. I hope you have time to rest following today's session. So I'm going to pass this right on back to Dennis. Dennis, you in your introductory remarks shared a little bit about conflicts, climate change, and health in Eastern Africa. And I wonder if you can expand on that a bit, about the compounding crises across Africa, including climate change, resource conflicts, and displacement in East Africa, and some recommendations you may have.
Yeah, thank you again, Molly. And it's important to probably understand the interplay between these crises. And to start with, it's very crucial to recognize that these challenges are not isolated. They form a very deep interconnected web of crises, and climate change acts more like a force multiplier, meaning it kind of exacerbates the vulnerabilities, especially in Eastern Africa. This is prolonged drought and erratic rainfall patterns that has changed a lot. And in turn, because of this climate crisis, there's been scarcity that has fueled conflicts, especially over land and over water. And most of these communities that are searching for grazing land end up being into violent clashes. So I've had an opportunity to work with some of these communities and probably refugees who are escaping Southern Africa, South Sudan rather, Sudan, Somalia, and Ethiopia. And most of them end up being something around moving or scrambling for arable land. So for this, the role of climate change in conflicts and displacement has come out very clear in this perspective. And also there has been health impacts of this compounded crisis. This is especially to refugee health and internally displaced people who then face a lot of health challenges because of the situations that they live in. So it's very important to probably integrate this health into some of the peace and climate strategies. And that is also one of the very topics that I have been interested in, and I've been trying to also bring this perspective into my IPPNW work within Kenya and within Eastern Africa. And health, as we've previously seen, it's becoming the central discussion around climate action, and I think this is a good step. This is something that probably IPPNW has been working towards for a long time. So this means that we probably are going to have a greater or a louder voice in terms of speaking nuclear disarmament, speaking conflict resolution, especially in different aspects of or different affiliates of IPPNW. So for me, I feel like that's basically what the topics of interest that I find very important to me within conflict, climate change, and health, and with an East African perspective. Over to you, Mon.
Thank you, Dennis. Yusuf, we're going to jump back to you. I don't see you anymore. I hope you can still hear us. I would love to hear from you on why disarmament belongs in climate conversations. We heard you talk a little bit about this in your introductory remarks, but we'd love to hear a bit more.
Thank you for your question, Molly. And apologies, I've not appreciated Laura for being able to make it here despite being under the weather. It's glad to see you, Laura. So disarmament is actually a crucial, going back to the question, it's a crucial climate change conversation because military action and climate change are deeply interconnected and both pose existential threats to humanity, and addressing them together rather can amplify solutions for a sustainable future and also a peaceful one. So environmental impacts of military actions are quite significant in contributing to environmental degradation. For example, like the polluters we have around from the fossil fuels and in synergy with the fuel consumption from operations, exercises, and also bases, which generates massive greenhouse gas emission, which we are all advocating for the reduction in both COP 28 and 29, and also nuclear weapons. The mere existence of nuclear weapons pose great threats to the climate because the production and also the testing and the potential use of those weapons have catastrophic long-term environmental consequences, which they include radioactive contamination and also climate destruction, such as nuclear winter scenarios that have been given. Examples have been given a countless number of times by ERA Health Fund. And also there's also diverted resources. So the enormous financial resources that are allocated to militarization could be redirected towards combating climate change. For example, the investments of renewable energy and also adaptation strategies and the global climate financing for vulnerable nations. If things like this are put into place, I think it would be of enormous importance. And also the reducing military spending for funds for climate change efforts is both a moral and a practical imperative. So it's very important to look into the diversion of funds that are used in maintaining nuclear arsenals into the climate space. So there are also very important linkages like the humanitarian linkage, the role of global corporations, and which the role of global corporations where we say disarmament fosters international corporations, and it is a key element for tackling climate change. Multilateral agreements like the Paris Agreement for the TPNW, which demonstrates global willingness to address these interconnected threats collaboratively. So at COP, I would also want to say that I saw how integrating climate justice with peace building efforts can lead to a holistic solution, where advocates emphasized that disarmament isn't just about reducing nuclear weapon stockpiles, but it is also about reallocating those resources to build resilient societies and addressing the root causes of conflicts, which include climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. Yeah, last year alone, the nuclear weapon states spent over $91 billion on maintaining and investing in their nuclear arsenals, which, as you clearly stated, could be put towards mitigating these compounding crises that Dennis explored a little bit in his remarks. So all three of these kind of areas that we're focused on, demilitarization, nuclear power, and nuclear weapons, clearly interact with one another, and shows how important it is for IPPNW to have the space in COP, in the Summit of the Future, and in the rest of these conversations. So thank you. Now we're going to move on to Laura, who's going to share a bit about the intersection of militarism and the climate crisis.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. And I will try to maybe wrap a few things together that my previous speakers have already highlighted, because I think for us here, being in such a one of the countries that is amongst the largest weapons exporters, and seeing ever rising military spending, and also actually seeing now the impacts of climate change for the previous years in Germany and Austria, all of these places too. It's really about highlighting the vicious circle between climate crisis, violent conflict, war, and militarization. And I think, it's not even just a circle, it's a bit of a spiral. Like they can be a downward spiral, or they can form an upward spiral. And of course, health will either way be impacted immensely by all of these aspects. And it seems to me that some of these aspects within that circle, if you can visualize that with me, are coming to the front. They are being tackled at least a little bit more, which is welcome. Some of these aspects are being used, I would say, by militaries and other security actors to push through their agendas. And then other aspects are still more or less under the radar, and that is particularly the carbon emissions of militaries and war, and of course the large military spending. And if that's okay, I would just like to focus on each of these aspects very briefly. I think the first interlinkage that also Dennis Opondo has really brought to us from his clear experience on the ground is that climate crisis is a stressor that can exacerbate situations that lead to violent conflict. And we do have research that clearly outlines that, for example, for the Syrian civil war, where a 100-year drought then compounded with political instability, authoritarian oppression, and then led to more pressure in the cities, and then eventually led to the uprisings and to war. And it felt to me that this interlinkage is also being recognized on the big arena of climate talks more. In Dubai, we had the first Peace Day. We also had the first Health Days. That was at COP28. And the Declaration on Peace, Recovery and Relief came out of that. That was followed up this year in Baku. They had a Baku call on that topic. So this is a multi-state initiative that really tries to get more climate finance into conflict-affected and fragile countries, because that's really a large gap. Like these areas are particularly badly adapted to climate change because fewer, of course, the resources are fewer anyway, if you are also suffering from violent conflict and all of these other factors, but also climate investments there are a lot fewer. And we also see these efforts of making, excuse me, making peace-building efforts more climate responsive and making climate actions more peace conducive. So I think this is really a step forward, and I hope that this initiative will be carried to Belém and not just be wordings. And I think it will be up to civil society to push for that, to make it as inclusive as possible, to make it as transparent as possible, and to work for that. The other aspect, of course, is that we also saw for the previous years militaries and big security actors like NATO taking up climate crisis and really saying, so this is a security threat, and of course their main goal is then to be still operationable in a changing environment, in a changing climate, and to position themselves as the solution to the climate crisis. We see this in many security strategies that have been put out over the last years. In Germany, it was the national security strategy at the end of 2023. Then we had a follow-up that's really looking at climate and security more particularly in 2024. And I think this is an area that we really clearly have to combat, that militaries are not the solution to the climate crisis. They are part of the problem. And that really brings me to my last point, the military carbon emissions that are estimated to be 5.5. I mean, I always say this and everyone always says this, but I think it's really important that we have that figure. It's 5.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And that is an estimate because we do not have transparent data, because the reporting is still voluntary under the UNFCCC. And that's a big problem. And of course, that is not something that NATO or other military alliances are willing to speak about. And this is, I think, where we need to come in. I always compare this, as we are physicians, to the global healthcare sector, which has emissions of 4.4% globally. And we have all these initiatives of trying to make the healthcare sector less carbon intensive, and they are important and they are good. But of course, militaries and war that lead to death and destruction need to be tackled there as well. And I think also there, even though it seems a long way from happening in political reality, at least we are getting some more of that data. We are seeing more reports. We also see these estimates that show us that military spending aligns directly with carbon emissions. I mean, it's not surprising, but we have numbers that show that. And I think we can make the case with that to reduce them. We are seeing in Ukraine and in Gaza too, that these are the first wars where military, or not even military, but war carbon emissions are actually being accounted for. I'm sure most of you will know this, but the first 24 months of the Russian war in Ukraine has caused 175 million tons of carbon emissions. So this is about the same as a country of the size of Belgium has produced in the same time span. And I think this aspect, like trying to always, even if it's difficult in these times, pointing out that we need to reduce military spending, that we need this money or these resources in general to flow into a healthy and climate just future. This is really our task, and I feel very confident that we will push for that.
Thank you so much, Laura. I really love that imagery of this not being just a cycle of militarism, war, and climate breakdown, but a spiral that can either lead to human prosperity, healthy communities, a more peaceful world for all, or one of climate breakdown, human harm, and environmental breakdown is a really incredible imagery to think of here. So with that in mind, as we create this spiral of human prosperity, health, and hope, I would love to hear from each of you on what actionable steps are ahead for us in 2025. We'll have about 7 minutes total to answer this question so that we have time for Q&A. So if you can maybe quickly, we'll start with you again, Dennis. What actionable steps for 2025 you see, and maybe in that, where there are areas of hope?
Thank you, Molly. And I think that is really one thing that I'm looking forward to, and as IPPNW, I believe there is so much that we can do, especially at this time where we're having a climate crisis and we are also at the brink of nuclear war. So some of the actionable plans that maybe we can take part in is probably prioritizing or just policy priorities for government, especially for African government. So as we know, COP29 was a finance COP, and just building on the outcomes of COP29, particularly with the new collective quantified goal, we must be part of the acceleration to mobilize more funds, especially for Global South, for climate adaptation. It's also important that we kind of use disarmament as a funding source. And this means that more of the military spending can be diverted into climate action. And I can, at least one of the things I know, probably Kelvin Kibet, who is the African regional president, has been part of, is trying to get African governments to ratify the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear War. And that is one of the core things that he was doing in Addis Ababa during the AU meeting at some point last year. And this also was a chance to advocate for global disarmament and the role of African governments in disarmament in general. So this is an opportunity that we can use to rather use disarmament as a source of funding. So I also, there is an opportunity that we've had as IPPNW, and I probably mentioned this at some point this week. So as an outcome of the UN Civil Society Conference, the Impact Coalition came up, and I believe that IPPNW probably has a role in making some of these global security reforms. So the Impact Coalition was launched at some point late last year, and part of the IPPNW Germany team has been has joined the campaign. So I had brought it up to probably discuss on how IPPNW can have a role in making reforms for the UN Charter, and making sure that our concerns on peace and security are addressed in the new chapter. So this is also this gives IPPNW a long-standing commitment on peace and global security. So just to finish up, IPPNW has a big role ahead, especially in terms of climate and disarmament advocacy in 2025. So this is probably targeting COP30, which is an opportunity to probably pick up what IPPNW has been doing for the past 2 years, since the first delegation in COP28 and the second delegation in COP29. So this is a chance to continue pushing the advocacy on the twin existential threat between nuclear weapons and climate change. So these are some of the opportunities that I also feel. And just to finish up, IPPNW now has a role of probably getting more doctors or more healthcare workers to join in, because as I mentioned earlier, IPPNW has never been more relevant. And this is the time that we probably can get more people, and we get stronger voices in terms of advocacy for disarmament and climate crisis. Over to you, Molly.
Thank you for that clear call to action, Dennis. Yusuf, why don't we quickly move on to you and share some actionable steps for 2025?
Thank you very much, Molly. And thank you, Dean, you've almost highlighted everything, but I'd like to also make more emphasis rather on the lead for global efforts in integrating peace and disarmament, and also climate into health advocacy. And this is what IPPNW has actually been known for. We resound to the ears of our listeners and the world at large the detrimental effects of nuclear weapon detonation, as well as climate change, which the Nexus explains very clearly. And it is quite important not to ignore the fact that radiation comes in little doses that individuals might not know. So coming from the standpoint of as a healthcare practitioner, rather, we try in as much as possible to make it very much known and clear to even the consumers of nuclear energy, thinking it is quite clean, that it is really not, because it has actually been a very disturbing very disturbing to us as healthcare providers and people who are very well knowledgeable about the detrimental effects of nuclear energy in even at COP, where people from the nuclear the people that are supporting nuclear energy are out there advocating that nuclear energy is a clean form of energy, and all, sharing things like banana, saying it has more radiation than nuclear energy. And the stepping in abuses the mind of people that would want to be brainwashed by those individuals. So that is my take with that regard. And also, it is quite important for us in the coming year that IPPNW should partner also with governments and also with non-governmental organizations to develop actionable policies linking these critical areas. So it is quite important that Nigeria has signed and ratified the TPNW. I think about 3 years ago, which is quite important. And this is the third year that the TPNW has been signed into law by the UN, and we should intensify efforts in calling for the TPNW to be signed and ratified by countries who have not done that, which will really make that to gain more strength in disarmament space. And also IPNW's continual building of awareness through events such as the bike tours that we keep doing. It's a beautiful thing. It keeps sending out our voice to the world at large about our goals and visions, and also the detriments of that nuclear weapons and nuclear energy pose on humanity. And also publications are very important from various affiliates to do that in synergy with other organizations, which will also inspire the community to work with respect to disarmament and also collective actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. Laura, last but certainly not least, if you can share some actionable steps for 2025, And just before you go, I see there are a few comments in the chat. We're running quite low on time, but please put any comments or questions in the chat and we can either address them now or via email following today's session. So Laura, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. I think most of my points have already been touched upon. I think the important initiatives that we are already part of, and of course our outreach to communities and the role of health professionals is always one of the most important aspects of IPPNW's work. So for me, maybe a bit more broadly, I mean, COP29, of course, was a disappointment in so many different ways, starting from the host country and all these impacts to the completely, failed finance goal that will now be an issue for the next few years. But I do think there rests some hope in Brazil being the host country and maybe pushing for some of these initiatives regarding finance, regarding tax. So this will be interesting to follow. The initiatives that I mentioned briefly that are really tackling this very important, but of course still not broad enough aspect of climate action in conflict settings, I think will be interesting to follow and see what happens. I mean, Germany is one of the initiative's leads, so I am planning on doing that. In the longer run, I do hope that, especially as Yusuf said, we will also engage with governments. And I think that is one of our strengths as an international alliance, to maybe be able to get more governments on board regarding military spending and military emissions, because again, we have these few countries that are really on the contributor side, and they are the same countries that are contributing overall to climate crisis. And I think, I mean, my vision is at some point that we will have something similar to the TPNW regarding these emissions, and really get those countries on board that are not contributing, but are made unsafe by these practices. So maybe this very brief, and I would love to hear a bit more from the audience. And Molly, I know you will have to run, so then I will take over and make sure that we get to a finish, and I would also cease the recording now.